So yeah, a couple of weeks ago, me and Fotis, we were visiting Amsterdam. We went to a conference called Performance.now. It was pretty nice and sunny in Amsterdam. And the event was a conference where there were like about 350 visitors. In this picture, you can see us in the front somewhere. And yeah, the event was called Performance.now.
Yeah, now you might be wondering, what .now? What the hell? So thankfully, MDN has the answer. The Performance.now method returns a DOM high-res timestamp measured in milliseconds. You're typically using that to measure performance in the browser. It says high-res timestamp, and then after that, it actually tells you this is not actually a high-resolution timestamp. I kind of love that the DOM high-res is not high-res. But yeah, I think that's to prevent some timing attacks. And I think we tried it out with Jarno the other day, actually. And in Chrome, it was more high-res than Firefox, but who knows? Anyway, and the conference itself now was on the 8th and 9th of November. It's the first time they did this sort of conference, at least in the Netherlands, in that group of conferences. 16 speakers, 2 days, pretty intensive, actually. Like eight talks in a day is quite taxing on your attention span. It's kind of the speakers as well. Any comments on that?
I think we'll go through all of the talks and comment something about. There were 16 presentations during 2 days, so quite hectic.
Yeah, and actually that's a good point. Is that what we were thinking a lot about how to sort of do this. I think what we've decided is to sort of run you through the various areas that we found in the talks. And then you can see if you're interested in any of those areas, there's other talks under these areas. In particular, because what we found was that the talks were super related to one another.
Yeah.
So these are the sort of 5 areas: performance culture, topics in performance, geeking out, having fun, bit of everything. And the future, nobody said that in the conference. That's literally us yesterday making these slides, figuring this shit out.
And all the talks are available in YouTube, so we added the link. We will share the slides. We didn't do that yet, but we will share the slides.
So here's like 5 talks. I think this was one of my favorite sort of areas of talks, in the sense that it addresses something that's very subtle in a way, and it's like, okay, performance is really cool, like maximizing those numbers is great. What does it all mean? And also, why the heck would the client care? Why the heck would your coworkers care, you know? Super interesting seeing a variety of people talking about this. So Katie Saller-Miller, midway through the conference, had this really cool talk called Performance Archaeology. She herself had studied archaeology, and it's really cool to see the approach to sort of like unearthing existing practices or figuring out what the values are in a certain setting.
Well, yeah, she had some really good points about how to look into old code. It's like archaeology. You try to understand the reasons why people were doing stuff.
Yeah, and what was very interesting about it is actually she works at Etsy, and Etsy is pretty well known in performance circles for their attention to performance, and yet even they themselves were saying that we're known for this thing, but you know, even changing things takes effort, and keeping these things fast takes effort, and that's also something that Scott Zell said in his performance. Like they're very interrelated. He was saying that exactly this thing, that keeping sites fast is actually way harder than making them fast, and I'm inclined to agree with that, actually.
Yeah. And we could pretty well relate to the presentation because it was like a horrible mess. They had to go through a bunch of JavaScript files manually and delete stuff that was not needed and stuff like that. And they built some really nice tools around that. So and they open sourced them. I don't know if we could start using them, but yeah. Let's see.
I've also had to manually go through stuff and see if I delete.
Yeah, we have done that as well.
Another really cool one you might like is rendering metrics in UX, actually. Very approachable performance. Great. Talk about performance. In particular, Tammy went through explaining the various popular metrics that exist, and sort of, you know, there's no perfect metric for everything. There's no single metric that they say, yeah, we maximize this number and now we win. Like, there's no such thing. And I think she did a really good job at covering these sort of ideas.
Yeah, and I think she explained really well how to use custom performance metrics, because we were having like tons of custom performance metrics because we thought they were cool, but it's actually not the point. You should have as few custom performance metrics as possible. So right now, after that conference, we reduced the size of our custom performance metrics. Now we only have 3 that we follow and try to optimize.
And the other message I really liked was by Tim Kadlec at the end, the long tail of performance. Basically, he went through explaining, we typically look at medians, let's say, in performance or 95th percentiles or whatnot. But actually looking at this 95th percentile, these really badly performing, or really bad performance metrics at the end. So if you have like your clients for whom the painting is really slow, he was saying that it's really worthwhile to look into those numbers because you might actually find that those things are slow for all your clients. It just happens that some of your clients have like more expensive devices than others.
Yeah, and if you optimize for the 5% who have a super slow experience, you end up optimizing for everybody.
He had some really cool applied metrics from working with Mozilla actually on MDN and their font loading. It was super nice. Let's move on. Performance culture. If you're interested in that, those talks are there. Topics in performance.
Yeah, so this was actually the first talk of the conference. It was opened by Steve Suders, who was titled as the grandfather of web performance, or actually the godfather of web performance. It was super, super, super interesting talk. You should definitely watch it. And he was explaining like how JavaScript is the root of all evil.
Almost, yeah. He, but the thing I really liked in all of these talks, that none of them were like, you're fucking it up. Like nobody said that, and that's what I loved about it. Every single person there had this approach that, hey, here's something that's really important about performance. You might not be aware of it. Here's how to fix it. Here's how to make it better. And there's like, there's fonts on that slide. If I'm really interested in like fonts performance myself. And that was great because like fonts, for instance, you might not know that fonts on your browser might be invisible for 3 seconds. Like you have content and the user is not seeing it for 3 seconds.
Yeah, and you might not know that fonts loading might cause like 5 reflows during the page load. Yeah. And that's horrible experience for your users.
A couple of things are like the same with debugging UI performance issues and kind of what CSS properties are performant to transition and so on. And third-party governance, you might have a thing to say about third parties.
Yeah, and one point actually about the slides. We were going to link all the titles to YouTube videos directly, and we did it for this one talk, and we forgot to do it for the others. But we might do it. It's a bit manual work, but we might do it, or we could send the link to the slides and then. But yeah, this was super interesting. Harry Robos, he had been working with some clients and like debugging some issues with third parties, blocking the whole rendering of a page for the default timeout, which was something like 120 seconds.
Yep.
So because of loading a web font or something from an external source, the users were experiencing like blank page for 2 minutes and then the page would load.
They were probably not experiencing, they were probably despairing and giving up at 15 seconds.
Of course.
But I like what was basically the theme of the talk is that usually your third parties have third parties, which have third parties. So you can see where this is going. And something cool that he mentioned, though, that I did not expect to work at all, but apparently it does, is actually he was contacting those third parties and even the third parties of the third parties.
True.
Try saying that 3 times twice. Also because we don't have that many third parties in our project, but I think all of it
we
does.
have. Should we say something about the web images or like the optimizing images? That was also super interesting. Like he was showing a demo how to load progressive JPG, or actually he was first explaining what the JPG is and how it's decoded.
Really cool visualization,
yeah,
actually.
That was,
yes.
And he had made it in the slides.
Yeah.
I don't know how he did that, but it was amazing. So he showed how the JPG works and how it's built and how you can reorganize the bits in the file in order to load the image fast, or like it for a human eye it looks ready faster. Yeah. After like 25% of the data you will think that it's almost done, or looks visually almost done.
He was talking a lot about progressive JPEGs, and also something I didn't know at all, for instance, in this talk was that WebP support is almost here. Like WebP is like a more efficient image format. It's almost here in Firefox and Edge. Also, it's almost obsolete.
Yeah.
And I love that code that, we're probably going to get WebP just before it is obsolete. But
Yeah, and he showed like how to get the best compression at the moment is to have a one frame video tag, or like have your image
Yeah,
inside
because
the video
like the
tag.
the new video formats are more efficient at compressing images. Actually, WebP is also based on a video format, and yeah, don't do it. Actually, don't do it. Just to be clear, but it's fun to think about. Geeking out, having fun. The reason we named this section like that is the first talk is geeking out, the second one is fun. So we're like, okay, let's go for that. Geeking out with performance sticks was really interesting. Adrian is apparently the creator of Django. Was talking about this really nice site they built about writing, or I don't even know how to call it, like sheet music that's actually rendered web natively and also follows the cursor and reflows and
Yeah. And he is the
so
creator
much
of
stuff.
Django,
Yeah,
so a web
so-
framework, but he didn't use any frameworks in his tool, like the project. And actually, he has a really interesting talk, like the web framework authors. What is it called?
I don't
Talk
know.
about against web frameworks, or something like that. Look it up in YouTube; it's super interesting.
But mostly, like I liked his talk because he was really into explaining minuscule optimizations that actually had huge impact on performance. In particular, the thing that he was not optimizing about was like a web developer resizing the browser like that, like we tend to do, and saying, yeah, the user never really resizes the browser, so it's fine if we optimize paint instead of like reflows, and that was really cool actually.
Yeah, and it was pretty interesting. He had to do some optimizations for JavaScript booleans because they were wasting too much memory, so he had to use some bitwise operations on those.
And then fun with HTTP headers. Well, it's what it says. Fun with HTTP headers. There's the HTTP archive. If you haven't seen it, there's a really cool page where you can query data from like millions of websites, basically. And yeah, the the speaker went through a bunch of those and was ranking the headers, which ones are used. And it's like, most used header number 3, P3P policy. It doesn't do anything, but it's there in like 80% of sites, not 80%, but something like that. It's
But
just-
huge percentage anyways. So people are sending unnecessary headers on their web pages, and then some headers they are using wrong. They just don't know how to use them.
And the thing I liked a lot about it is that it shows how much legacy you carry around, right? Because it's like, these are your family's headers. Go and keep passing them on. So-
Yeah, the most funny one was about the caching. You send all the possible headers, like
Yeah, it's like when you really don't want something to be cast, like no cast, private, max 80, expired, 20 years ago, even though yesterday is also in the past.
yeah, that was so fun.
Yeah, that like the slide says, you're gonna have fun if you watch that talk. It's really good. Like it almost made me wanna go through the HTTP archive and see what the heck I can find there.
Or look at your own project.
I'm not. We definitely said extra cast headers. Bit of everything, mostly because we couldn't figure out what to put them, but also very importantly because they touched upon all of those issues. PWAs, want to talk
Yeah,
about those?
it was super interesting talk about how to approach a project where it could happen that your client wants to have a PWA and they don't actually even know what it is. So he was actually trying to explain it, but there is no explanation for it. Like Google has changed the definition like 3 times already, and now it's like fire. So it's like fast,
Immersive.
whatever,
Immersive? Interactive? Who knows?
whatever, and reliable,
Reliable?
responsive,
Who knows?
whatever,
That's
and
right? Yeah.
something, but nobody knows what it means. But he had a really good point. It's not for developers, the definition of PWS.
Yeah.
It's just for management, so that they can have like a word they can use. And then
Yeah, I think
for
you're
developers, it's
simplifying
only
it.
like a website that has a service worker, uses HTTPS.
Yeah.
work.
So actually,
Yeah.
I read his book after that because
Yeah, I bought it
his,
as well.
his book launched a few days after the conference. Really interesting discussion into naming things, right? Exactly like you say, like you can be as snarky as you want about what the heck is a PWA, but at the end of the day, it's not for you. It's the same way like responsive design is not for you. It's the same way that HTML5 means jack shit to me, but like a few years ago, it definitely was like, yeah, we need to write our site in HTML5. And the cool thing he said, which I agree, is that it's a good drive to push forward the other sort of things that make users' experiences better. For instance, if you're like, let's make a PWA, the chances are way higher that you're going to care about performance, for instance, or accessibility, because you're pushing about these like very inclusive, very reliable sort of website.
Yeah, and he showed some results of like companies doing in PWA, and they have a lot more user engagement and better results on iOS devices, even though iOS didn't support service workers before. Now they do, but like, anyways, if you focus on performance, it will be useful for all of your users.
Yeah. And there was a closing keynote by Paul Iris. The title of the keynote, I don't know what it was, so we kind of just wrote it ourselves here. Metrics, history, browser performance APIs. Paul Iris works a lot on the Chrome dev team, as far as I understand. Yeah, browsers didn't like have first-class performance monitoring until a few years ago at most. So it's really interesting to see how they're trying to integrate and work with the community to figure out, how do we expose these metrics correctly.
And I think he did a really good job in explaining some of the basic performance metrics, such as speed index, although it's not probably the best metric, but anyways, it's important to understand how it works.
I think it's really interesting to watch if you watch this talk, I think it's really interesting to watch Tammy's talk as well, because they're very, it's like they're approaching the same issue from different sort of groupings, which is super nice. It gives you a really grounded idea of what the field looks like with regards to metrics. Moving on, final one, as far as I believe.
The future of protocols. There was a super interesting talk about protocols. So she was talking. She had been working with networks and whatever, everything like web development from like protocols, and she had been working in the work groups defining the new HTTP2 and stuff like that. And she was talking about, what was it called? Quick, yeah, the new protocol.
Which was not going to be called HTTP3, but as of a few days ago, it is going to be called HTTP3. Congrats.
Yeah, it's super interesting because it's built on UDP and not TCP, and she explained why. So it was super interesting.
Yeah, I had so much fun in that talk. I was literally laughing out loud at some point because it was like going through these really deeply technical things and then saying, telling you how people at working groups shout at each other. It's like super fun. And that was actually the other thing that both Natasha and you have touched upon, was a lot about the working groups in the technical committees, W3C and whatnot, like how the sausage gets made in a way, and it's like kind of terrifying but also kind of interesting. Yeah, and Yoav's talk was definitely a lot about the future. Similarly, about making the delivery of assets more efficient. What are the limitations of our current protocols, of our current delivery mechanisms? Really kind of comprehensive talk. Like it's a good 40 minutes as well. If you read it, you will kind of wish you had half of those things today, but you will probably not have them for a few years still, months at least. And actually, Yoav has a really nice article in the Smashing Book 6, which I have downstairs. So find me later if you want, which goes through this thing in, I think, a more digestible format. At least I preferred like reading about it, but some super cool stuff coming up with resource loading. Various thoughts that we wanted to touch upon, kind of. Already spoke about the linking between the presentations.
Yeah, but we didn't talk about like the presenters were showing in their presentations. They were showing pictures of the previous presenter, so it was a kind of immersive experience.
Yeah, I think at some point we reached like presenter on stage with a presenter in the slide with a presenter inside the slide. So it's like many layers of presentations. But also I loved something like, I think Katie mentioned at some point, she was saying that we're doing this thing at Etsy, like this and that and the other thing. I'm really curious what Michelle does in Pinterest, and I thought that was like just great, like this sort of curiosity and like interest in learning things between people and organizations is really nice.
Yeah, and then there was this one presentation where they told about how they have a performance organization, or like inside their organization they have a performance division, whatever you call it.
Like almost like a task force.
Yeah, and they were on call. So if their site would get slow because of a deployment, they would get a call, and then they would have to figure out who was the responsible team for that, and they would fix it immediately.
That reminds me, I didn't give enough details on Michelle's presentation. What's Michelle's presentation? The Pinterest one, because some really cool insights that I found as well when I was I'm working in performance is that like statements like, documentation is not communication. So it's like, as he was saying, that they have this really intricate wiki that has all the details. Like if you want to, you're going to go there and you're going to like be really good at performance.
But nobody goes.
But nobody will go there because why would they in many ways, right? And see, they had ideas like, betting sessions about performance, like getting together after that talk. And I think Jarno and anybody else on the feedback team can attest. I literally texted the team and said, okay, on Monday, I'm going to show you how to performance, please. We haven't done that yet, but very motivational if you watch that talk. I can guarantee that. Scott Zell, I had this really, he didn't even say it as a main, this is the quote, but it really stuck with me. Where he was saying that, hey, this thing is enabling. And he was saying that, if you make something very complex, you're enabling more complexity. If you make something, that can be abused, you can be damn sure that it will be abused and it will be slow and horrible for your users. And yeah, this is a really cool insight. Again, like making websites fast and keeping them fast. Yeah. Any other thoughts? And I like the other sciences and fields, like both Tammy and Michelle and Katie and Steve in many regards, like have had studies outside of just like being on top of this damn thing, and it shows. I think it really shows in how they approach, or even other fields of engineering. Like it shows how they approach sort of this data-driven approach to an experimentation-driven approach to performance. I think that's I could use more of that.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Other impressions?
Yeah, I think overall it was a really nice experience. Amsterdam was nice. Bitterballen was nice.
Yeah.
There are those food kind of things you eat.
Deep fried thing stuffs with something in them. I still don't understand what. And I've been to the Netherlands a few times now. The thing I wrote was value over watching online. I don't know about you. If I had to watch one of these talks online, it would take me 4 days, 300 tabs, and 5 coffee breaks, because my attention span is all over the place. But actually being there for 2 days and sitting down and going through the talks was amazing, because I would never watch 16 talks. I would have finished watching these talks a year from now. That's really nice. The second really cool thing about it was that again, like the topics were so interlinked. I think if I watched them separately over a period of time, I would not appreciate how like encompassing performance is in a way.
Yeah, and one good thing about the conference was that there was only one track, so we didn't have to choose where to go. So it was, and also all the presentations were so interesting, so we didn't mind.
Yeah, that definitely would recommend like going there again. Actually, it's on next year, so hey, like hit us up if you want to go. Pretty much that. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you. Any questions, comments?